He stood there in the same courtroom where his father once taught him the meaning of justice. Only this time, the man sitting on the opposite bench wasn't a stranger, a criminal, or an enemy. It was his father. The man who taught him to salute the flag was now pointing a legal finger at him. The cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and somewhere in the back row an old neighbor gasped. "Isn't that Colonel Ethan Cole? The NATO guy? Yeah, that guy." The soldier who spent 2 decades defending other people's countries was now fighting to defend his own name. Irony couldn't get any sharper than that. He didn't return home with glory and applause. He returned with scars, medals, and a heart ready for peace. But peace didn't live here anymore. It had packed its bags and left the moment his father filed the case. See, Ethan wasn't a hero in this courtroom. He was a defendant. And as the judge read the charges, fraud, property theft, betrayal of family trust, he couldn't help but smile. Not out of joy, but disbelief. How do you fight an enemy you once called Dad? The irony! The courtroom walls still had his father's picture, honored veteran, community leader, man of principles. Now, that same man was suing his own son for the house Ethan built with his military pension. Beautiful, right? They say every war changes a man, but no one tells you how it feels when your own blood becomes the battlefield. You expect the world to test your loyalty, not your family. Yet here he was, standing tall in his own father's line of fire. But don't get it twisted. This wasn't the end of Ethan Cole's story. This was the beginning of the real war, one that didn't need bullets or bombs. A war fought in silence through pride, pain, and a search for truth. You want to know how a soldier who risked everything for honor ended up being called a thief by the man who raised him? Let's go back. Before the courtroom, before the betrayal, before the papers were filed, before the father turned into a rival. Welcome, story lovers. From where are you watching? Drop your city name in the comments so we can see how far our story travels. Ethan Cole wasn't born into privilege. He was born into duty. His father, Richard Cole, was the kind of man who believed emotions were a sign of weakness. "Real men don't cry," he'd say, even at funerals. They fix things. Growing up in a small Midwestern town, Ethan learned early that love in the Cole household was measured not in hugs, but in expectations. His father was a retired police officer turned community hero, a man everyone admired, but few truly knew. At home, discipline ruled. There were no bedtime stories, no soft words. Just curfews, structure, and the sound of polished boots on hardwood floors. Ethan admired his father deeply, even when it hurt. He wanted to make him proud, to earn that nod of approval that never seemed to come. So, while other kids played baseball, Ethan practiced standing at attention. While others dreamed of summer trips, he studied military history. By the time he turned 18, the choice felt inevitable. He didn't join the military for adventure. He joined for validation. And when the NATO uniform first wrapped around his shoulders, he thought, now he'll see me. But distance doesn't fix broken roots. It only hides them. From Europe to the Middle East, Ethan served with relentless devotion. He became the kind of soldier people wrote about, courageous, calm, composed under fire. He earned medals, respect, and friendships that felt more like family than the one he left behind. And yet every time he returned home on leave, the same cold silence greeted him. His father never asked about his missions, his safety, or his nightmares. He'd just ask, "You still saving money?" As if Ethan's worth was measured in dollars, not duty, but Ethan never argued. He just smiled, nodded, and returned to base early, because war felt quieter than home. Still, he tried. Every paycheck, he sent money home, helped repair the old family house, paid his father's medical bills after a knee surgery. When Richard's business partner passed away, Ethan invested part of his pension to keep the family name alive. He told himself it was love. But love built on guilt never lasts. Then came the call, the one that would change everything. It was a NATO mission in Eastern Europe, a dangerous zone. Ethan volunteered first even when his team hesitated. He said it was for the cause, but deep down, it was for something else. To feel like his life meant something. That mission nearly ended him. His convoy hit an IED. He survived, but 2 of his men didn't. For months, he couldn't sleep. The sound of explosions replayed every time he closed his eyes. He came home with a limp, medals, and a prescription for insomnia. When he finally retired, all he wanted was peace. He bought a small farmhouse on the outskirts of town, his dream place. Quiet, green, close to the woods. He thought he'd finally start over. Maybe start a foundation for veterans. Maybe rebuild his relationship with his father. But the universe had a dark sense of humor. His father started visiting the farmhouse frequently, at first with kindness, then with questions. "Whose name's on the deed?" he'd ask casually. Ethan laughed it off, thinking it was just curiosity. But behind those questions hid something uglier: resentment. Richard didn't like the idea of his son outgrowing him. To him, Ethan wasn't a war hero. He was still the boy who once polished his shoes, the one who owed him everything. And then came the betrayal that broke Ethan's world in silence. One morning, he went to the bank to withdraw funds for a small veteran project, only to find his account frozen. The reason? A pending legal dispute, filed by his father, the man who once taught him honor, now accused him of forging property documents and manipulating family assets. Ethan thought it was a mistake, a clerical error, maybe a mix-up. But when the court summons arrived, signed by his father's lawyer, reality hit harder than any battlefield explosion. Still, he didn't fight back immediately. He visited his father's home hoping for a conversation, an explanation, even a misunderstanding to clear up. But when the door opened, Richard didn't even invite him in. He just said, "See you in court." That night, Ethan sat alone in his farmhouse, medals laid out on the table like ghosts from another life. Each one told a story of courage, loyalty, sacrifice. But what good were medals when your own blood turned against you? He poured himself a glass of water, stared at his reflection, and muttered under his breath, "I survived war zones, but I wasn't ready for this." The betrayal didn't just take away his peace, it shattered his sense of belonging. The house that once felt like home now felt like enemy territory. The land he had bought with pride now had his father's name entangled in lawsuits. And yet, beneath all the pain, something inside Ethan refused to die. Maybe it was the soldier in him. Maybe it was that quiet hope that one day the man who raised him would finally see the son who only ever wanted his respect. Because deep down, Ethan wasn't fighting for land or money. He was fighting for acknowledgement, for the simplest, most human thing of all, to be seen. Ethan never expected redemption. Every word was a dagger. Every rumor, a reminder that no uniform, no medal, no mission could protect him from the cruelty of family pride. But in the middle of despair, hope came from the unlikeliest place. While sorting through a box of his late mother's belongings, Ethan found an old ledger, handwritten notes, dates, and financial details she had meticulously recorded before she passed away. On one page, tucked between yellowed receipts, was an entry written in her neat cursive, "Ethan's NATO pension check, deposited into my account for safekeeping." His father insisted. Ethan froze. That note was dated years before he had even bought the farmhouse. His mother had known. She had quietly recorded every transaction, protecting her son in ways she couldn't in life. That single notebook could be the proof that destroyed the lie his father built. But using it came with risk. If he submitted it in court, his father's reputation, the decorated veteran, the community hero, would collapse overnight. And no matter what Richard had done, Ethan still loved him. That was the cruel part about love. It didn't vanish even when trust did. Tom urged him to use it. "This isn't revenge, Ethan, it's justice. You're defending your name." But Ethan hesitated. "He's my father," Tom leaned forward, voice steady. "Then you should remind him what a real man of honor looks like." The trial began 2 weeks later. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, the press eager for a headline. "War hero accused of fraud by his father." Each day peeled away layers of respect and memory until only raw truth remained. Ethan's father sat confidently with his lawyer, shaking hands with the judge, the crowd, even smiling for the cameras. He looked like the hero the world wanted him to be, but heroes, Ethan thought, don't build thrones on their children's pain. As testimonies unfolded, the lies grew bolder. His father's lawyer claimed Ethan had manipulated records, used his father's influence, and misused veteran benefits. Every sentence felt like a bullet. Still, Ethan stayed silent, calm, controlled, almost eerily composed. Years of military discipline taught him how to stand tall even when the world crumbled. Let them talk, he thought. Truth doesn't panic. Then one afternoon, Tom made his move. He called their surprise witness, a retired banker who had once handled the Cole family's accounts. Under oath, the man confirmed what Ethan already suspected. Richard had moved Ethan's pension money into his own account, years ago under the guise of joint family management. The courtroom gasped. For the first time, Ethan saw something shift in his father's eyes, not guilt, but fear. And then Tom pulled out the final card, Ethan's mother's ledger. The judge took the book, reading the pages carefully. It was undeniable. Every deposit, every note, every date was evidence of Ethan's innocence. But for Ethan, the victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like mourning. Mourning a bond that could never be repaired. Mourning the illusion of a father he thought he had. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. "Colonel Cole, do you have a comment on your father's allegations?" He simply said, "War teaches you to expect betrayal from your enemies. It doesn't prepare you for betrayal from your blood." And just like that, the cameras froze. Because behind those words wasn't anger. It was heartbreak. Ethan walked away from the microphones, leaving his father behind in a storm of silence. The fight wasn't over yet, but something inside him had already changed. He no longer sought his father's approval. He sought his own peace, and that in itself was the beginning of his redemption. The courtroom felt colder than any battlefield he'd ever been on. Not because of the air conditioning, but because of who was sitting across from him. His own father. The man who had raised him on lessons of honor, loyalty, and duty, now stared at him like a stranger. The veteran adjusted his uniform coat, every metal on his chest suddenly feeling heavier. Cameras flashed. The small-town courtroom had never seen this much attention before. A decorated NATO officer accused by his own father of fraud and betrayal. When he took the stand, he could feel every eye judging him, some with pity, others with disbelief. His lawyer whispered, "Just stay calm." But calm was the last thing he felt. Then his father stood up. Gray-haired, trembling slightly, but his voice was sharp. He took the land that never belonged to him. "My own son forged documents while I was in the hospital. I want justice." The words struck harder than gunfire. The crowd gasped. The veteran's chest tightened. This wasn't just about land. This was about trust, love, and the years he'd spent defending his family's name while they turned against him. He wanted to shout that it wasn't true, that the property, papers were legally signed by his father himself, before the illness had set in. But the judge motioned for silence. Evidence was presented, documents, voice notes, text messages. And then something unexpected appeared, a mysterious USB drive his father's lawyer had just discovered. The judge leaned forward. "What's on it?" The file played on the projector, distorted audio, snippets of conversation that made the veteran sound manipulative, even greedy. It was a setup, edited to make him look guilty. The audience murmured. His military achievements meant nothing now. The proud soldier who had survived war zones was being torn apart by whispers in his own hometown. He clenched his fists beneath the table. The betrayal burned deeper than any wound. He looked at his father, but the old man wouldn't meet his eyes. And then, just as the judge prepared to announce the next motion, his friend and former NATO comrade burst through the courtroom doors. "Your Honor," he shouted, holding a laptop. "That audio was fabricated?" "I can prove it!" The courtroom erupted. The lawyer objected. The judge demanded silence. The veteran's friend opened forensic files, timestamps, digital metadata, proof that the recordings had been manipulated. And as the truth unfolded, the veteran's father's lawyer began to sweat. The judge's expression changed, stern, now suspicious. The veteran finally stood, voice trembling but strong. "You taught me to fight for truth, Father. Even when the world turns against you, that's what I did for my country. And I'll do it here, even if it means fighting you." The silence that followed was electric. The crowd, once judgmental, now leaned in. His father looked small, defeated, not by his son, but by his own choices. Tears welled in the old man's eyes. And for a brief, flickering second, the soldier saw not an accuser, but a father, broken by pride and fear. The judge struck his gavel. "This court will adjourn until evidence is verified." But everyone already knew what that meant. The veteran didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply saluted the bench and walked out of that courtroom like he'd just returned from another kind of war. A war not of nations, but of blood. Dear audience, if this part moved you, imagine what happens when truth and forgiveness finally collide. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. The next chapter might just change how you see family, loyalty, and justice forever. Weeks passed after the courtroom storm. The truth finally prevailed. The forged evidence was exposed, the real culprits confessed, and every charge against him was dropped. But victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like silence, the kind that lingers after a battlefield, when smoke clears and you realize how much you've lost, even in winning. The veteran didn't celebrate. He packed his medals back into their case, left his lawyer's office, and drove home to the farmhouse that now felt like a museum of memories. Laughter, childhood echoes, his father's proud voice teaching him how to aim a rifle, how to tell right from wrong. Except now, those lines between right and wrong had blurred. One evening, as the sun sank over the hills, a knock came at his door. It was his father, frail, hesitant, holding his cane like a peace flag. For a long moment, neither spoke. The man who once accused him now stood there, tears streaking his cheeks. "I was wrong," the old man whispered. "I thought you were taking from me. But I see now, you were only protecting what I built." The veteran's throat tightened. All those sleepless nights, the humiliation, the doubt, it all broke like a dam. He stepped forward and hugged his father. No words, no explanations, just the sound of two men forgiving each other in silence. Months later, the veteran began speaking at military rehabilitation centers. Not about war, but about coming home, about how the real battles begin when the uniforms come off, when the medals don't stop the loneliness, and when forgiveness becomes the hardest mission of all. He created a small foundation for veterans and their families, offering legal help, therapy, and career counseling. The first donor? His father, who sold a portion of the disputed land to fund it. They named it Operation Homecoming. As news spread, his story reached national headlines again, this time not as a courtroom scandal, but as a story of redemption. Journalists called him the soldier who fought for family and won his father back. But he never called himself a hero. He just said, "I learned that justice without forgiveness is still a kind of war." Today he lives quietly on that same family land. The fences are mended. The fields bloom again. Every morning he salutes the flag outside his porch, not as a soldier bound by duty, but as a son who found peace. And sometimes, on quiet Sundays, his father joins him. Two men, side by side, watching the wind move through the wheat fields. The same land they once fought over, now united by something stronger than law or pride. The veteran doesn't talk much about the courtroom anymore. He prefers to talk about rebuilding, about second chances, and about how even in the deepest betrayal, love can still find a way home. Because not every war is fought on foreign soil. Some are fought in the heart. And when peace finally comes, it doesn't sound like applause. It sounds like forgiveness. Thanks for watching. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes the bravest battles aren't won overseas, but right where we live.